The notice was taped to my gate before I even shifted into park, bold, official, and feeling like a sucker punch to the gut. The HOA was claiming the road I'd driven down my entire life wasn't mine anymore. They said it was theirs, and I owed 7 years of retroactive dues. I looked out the windshield and saw trucks and inspectors already crawling over the dirt, measuring and taking notes like they already owned the place. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, my chest tightening as memories of my grandpa, laying those very stones one by one, flashed through my head. This wasn't just a stretch of gravel. This was my ranch, my history, and I wasn't about to let some suit in a pressed shirt erase 3 generations of sweat with a laminated map. That's how it started. I'm Jay Calloway, and out here, your word and your land are about all you've got. My grandfather built this place with his bare hands, fencing every acre and raising cattle long before I was even a thought in the world. When my father handed the keys to me, he gave me one piece of advice: never let anyone tell you what's yours isn't. I took that to heart. I'm not a man who goes looking for trouble. I wake up before the sun, feed the livestock, and go to bed tired and satisfied. But I'm also not a man who backs down when someone tries to fence me in on my own property. The next morning, I drove up to the gate ready for a fight. Richard Harland, the HOA president, was already there. Now, Richard is the kind of guy who wears a crisp, button-down shirt to a ranch and calls it field work. He's in his mid-50s, silver-haired, with that practiced smile of someone who spent decades getting his way by being polite while he stabs you in the back. "Mr. Calloway," he said, holding out his hand like we were old buddies. I didn't touch it. I just held up that notice. "What is this, Richard? You're telling me this road belongs to the association?" He clasped his hands together, all patient and rehearsed. "It's not personal, Jake. We did a review of the easements, and, according to our records, this road falls under our jurisdiction. That means dues apply going back 7 years. I did the math in my head. He was talking about tens of thousands of dollars. That's insane," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my blood was starting to simmer. "My grandfather built this road. It's on my deed." Richard just tilted his head with this infuriating calm and pulled out a map. He pointed to a yellow highlighted stretch that supposedly proved his point. But as I looked at it, I realized something was dead wrong. The lines didn't match the terrain. The curve of the road on his paper went east, but out here in the real world, it bends west. I pointed it out, and he just shrugged it off as a margin of error. A margin of error? The man was looking me in the eye and calling geography a mistake. He told me I had 30 days to pay up or they'd restrict my access. I looked past him at that road, the one I'd ridden my first horse down when I was 6 years old, and I just shook my head. "I'll tell you what, Richard, I'm not paying a single cent. Not now, not ever. And if you send one more person onto my land without permission, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation." He didn't lose that smile, but for a split second, I saw a flicker of something, not quite worry but close, in his eyes. That night, I spread every document I owned across the kitchen table. Deeds, survey maps, tax filings from the 50s, papers with my grandpa's careful handwriting, and old notary seals. My deed was crystal clear: private property maintained by the Calloway family. I stayed up past midnight cross-referencing everything. The more I looked, the more the HOA's version looked like a bad work of fiction. Either their surveyor was blind, or someone had drawn that line with a very specific, very greedy goal in mind. 3 days later, the letters started. First, the bills. Then, a letter from a law firm threatening a lien against my ranch. Alien. They wanted to put a legal claim on my family's legacy over a map that didn't even match reality. My daughter, who's away at college studying pre-law, called me that evening. She told me, "Dad, they can't just claim a road. You need documentation, photos, maintenance records, witnesses." So I got to work. I photographed every private property sign my dad had put up decades ago. I found gravel receipts and grading invoices going back 15 years, all paid out of my own pocket. I called my old neighbors, too. Earl Hutchkins, who's been down the way for 40 years, remembered my grandpa grading that road before the HOA was even a twinkle in a developer's eye. "That road was always yours, Jake," he told me. Margaret O'Casey, who runs the boarding operation nearby, confirmed she always asked my permission before using it. Their words were gold. But Richard wasn't waiting for the legal process. I came home one afternoon to find orange cones at my entrance with a sign saying access subject to association approval. I just stared at it, took a photo for evidence, tossed the cones aside, and kept driving. He was testing me, trying to see if I'd crack. I called my attorney, Thomas Greaves. He's a quiet, methodical man who doesn't waste words. "Send me everything," he said. "I think someone made a very bold move assuming you wouldn't push back. I also think they underestimated you." He was right. Richard Harland spent his career winning by making people feel small and outmatched. He sends lawyers and laminated signs and waits for folks to give up. But I wasn't giving up. The gloves really came off a week later. Richard started planting no trespassing signs every 50 yards along my road, 12 of them professional metal stakes. Every single one was on my land. I didn't pull them out, though. Thomas told me to document the trespass first. Then my neighbor Darnell called me, sounding heated. "Jake, there's an HOA truck at your entrance telling my delivery driver he can't use the road without authorization." I was there in 8 minutes. 2 guys in polo shirts with clipboards were standing there like they owned the place. I didn't yell. I just told them they had 30 seconds to get back in their truck before I called the sheriff for trespassing. They left, but I knew they were just taking notes on my reaction. The psychological warfare didn't stop there. Richard started poisoning the well in town. I heard whispers at the feed store. People I'd known for years were acting cold. Patricia Monroe pulled me aside to the hardware store and told me Richard had held a community meeting. He told everyone I was unreasonable and that I was blocking access the community relied on. He even had a slideshow, a presentation. He was shaping the narrative while I was home filing papers. But here's the thing about bullies like Richard. They forget that the truth has a way of coming out, especially when you have neighbors who remember. Earl Hutchkins started calling people, telling them what he'd told me. Margaret sent me a text saying Richard's behavior was disgraceful. Eva Darnell stopped by to tell me he'd back me up. One by one, the people who actually knew the history of the land started picking a side. Then, Thomas called me with a smoking gun. He'd gone through the county records, and he found that the map Richard showed me wasn't from when the HOA was founded 22 years ago. It was filed only 18 months ago. 18 months. I asked. "Exactly," Thomas said. "And it gets better. The amendment that added your road was signed by Richard Harland and the treasurer, Vincent Pute. But the notary's stamp? I called her. She has no record of ever signing that document. It's not in her logs." My jaw nearly hit the floor. This wasn't a mistake. This was a flat-out forgery. Thomas did some digging and found that Vincent Pute had been involved in 2 other boundary disputes in the county over the last 4 years. Both times, they'd used an amended map, applied pressure, and the owners settled just to make the lawyer bills stop. I sat on my porch that night, looking at those red HOA signs glowing in the moonlight. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Richard had built this whole scheme on the idea that I'd feel isolated and afraid. He thought I'd look at the legal costs and just fold. He picked the wrong ranch, and he definitely picked the wrong rancher. The community meeting was held at the Pinecrest Community Center. The place was packed. Richard was at the front table, looking smooth and confident, framing the whole thing as a simple administrative matter. He talked about shared responsibility and unfair burdens. He even put that fake map up on a big screen for everyone to see. When it was my turn, I walked to the front with a manila folder. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked the room, "Does anyone know when this HOA was founded?" Someone shouted out, 22 years ago. "Right," I said, "and I have the original map from 22 years ago right here." I held it up. A woman from the audience came up to look, then looked at the screen. "They're different," she whispered. "They are," I said louder now. "Because this road was added 18 months ago in a filing signed by Richard and Vincent. And I have a statement here from the notary whose name is on that filing. She says she never signed it." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that linoleum floor. I looked at the other board members, longtime residents who clearly had no idea what Richard had been up to. One of them, Diane, looked at Richard and asked, "Is that true? Did you verify this?" Richard tried to pivot, talking about complex legal documents and minor irregularities, but Thomas stood up and clarified that a forged notary stamp is a felony, not a minor irregularity. I laid out the rest: the maintenance receipts, the neighbor statements, and the history of Vincent Pute's disputes. I told them, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here because this is my family's land, and what's been done to try and take it is wrong. And I think if any of you were in my boots, you'd be standing right where I am. The aftermath was swift. The board held an emergency session that night and stripped Richard and Vincent of their positions. The retroactive dues were dropped immediately, and the HOA's own lawyers advised them to distance themselves from Richard as fast as possible to avoid a massive lawsuit. A few days later, I was out of my gate pulling those red "No Trespassing" signs out of the dirt myself. Richard drove by in his spotless truck. He didn't stop. He didn't look. He just kept his eyes on the road. I watched him go, then I tossed the last of his signs into the back of my pickup to be hauled to the dump. I'm back to my routine now, waking up before the sun, checking the fences, and enjoying the quiet. But every time I drive down that road, I'm reminded that some things are worth the fight. It makes me wonder, though, how many other people have lost a piece of their history because they were too afraid to look closer at a laminated map or a legal notice? What would you do if someone tried to tell you your own front door didn't belong to you anymore? Would you pay for the peace and quiet, or would you dig in your heels and fight for the truth, no matter the cost? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see where you draw the line. And hey, if you think justice still means something, share this story. We got to look out for each other out here.